she's currently the executive director. Before coming into that position, she taught Spanish, and she is a fluent Spanish speaker. And as a result, she's also very interested in the history of Spanish-speaking people who came to Saranac Lake to cure from TB. She currently lives in Saranac Lake with her husband Roger and her 2 sons. And we're also going to hear from Mary Hotaling, who is one of the founders of Historic Saranac Lake. And she also helped found the Adirondack Architectural Heritage Society. She has a master's degree in historic preservation from the University of Vermont. And she is the author of a book about Edward Livingston Trudeau called A Rare Romance in Medicine, The Life and Legacy of Edward Livingston Trudeau. She lives in Saranac Lake with her husband, Jim Hotaling, who's also well known as an architect in other capacities. So Mary is going to start off, so please welcome Mary and Amy.
First, to make sure you can hear me.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. Okay. Well, this is a reprise of a talk I gave here in 1991 in this very room. It's shortened. This is only, I'm going to talk about the cure porches and their development. It was given at an annual meeting of Historic Saranac Lake that year. It's called The Building for the Outdoor Life, Porch Development in Saranac Lake. Can you all see the screen? Am I in the way of you? Some of you? Well, I guess I can stand out of it. I'm going to have to run back and forth. Okay. The story of cure porches began at Dr. E.L. Trudeau's Adirondack Cottage Sanitarium. He wrote, "As the sanitarium was from the first an experiment and had no precedent in this country for its guidance, its growth and development have naturally been along the lines of a gradual evolution. The architects William Scopes and Maurice Fustman seconded that idea when in 1935 they published an article titled Evolution of Sanatorium Construction in the Journal of the Outdoor Life. It's that experimentation and evolution that I will be talking about here." So the first picture we have is Little Red. I expect you all know that. Oops. I expect you all know this. This is the first little patient cottage at the sanatorium. The use of porches for the treatment of tuberculosis began at his sanatorium with the earliest cottages in 1885. Dr. Trudeau wrote, "This first cottage consisted of one room, 14 by 18, and a little porch so small that only one patient could sit out at a time, and with difficulty." And I bet many of you have visited Little Red, and if you haven't, Historic Saranac Lake gives tours there. So you can see Amy about that at some other time. At this time, all porches were for ambulatory patients to sit out on during the day and get the benefit of the fresh mountain air, so much cleaner than the air of the cities most patients came from. The porches they sat out on were ordinary verandas, like those anywhere else in America where the Queen Anne house was in style. So, here's the Stevenson cottage, which I expect you all know. Robert, this is one of these pretty early verandas where patients sat out. He came in 1887. And the Linwood cottage, which was downtown where Newberry's or Sears or I don't know what the latest incarnation is of the parking lot is, but it was on the back part of that parking lot, and the whole part where we park was their lawn. So curing on porches of private cottages was going on in the village at the same time it was developing the sanatorium. Here, early patients are sitting in straight chairs with blankets on their knees. I don't know if you can see that, right along their blankets, and their maybe rockers sometimes. The Adirondack recliner was unknown in those early days. That is what we all know as a cure chair. The first infirmary at the sanatorium for bedridden patients was the Hall Memorial Cottage, opened in 1892 or 93. The exterior, someone wrote about this at the time, the exterior had never been attractive, the open verandas a failure in stormy weather. It was a deck, it was open, and there are pictures of these patients sitting there. covered up with, hats, coats, blankets. The first patient, this is a good story, was Charles Armstrong, who broke his leg bobsledding. That's what patients could do in those days. This was the first unintentional test of the rest cure. When he got up 20 weeks later, his lungs as well as his leg were healed. While standing up for the picture. This building is photographed very often by patients, so there are pictures of it all over the place. The next picture is Inslee Cottage, also at the sanatorium. And it's very typical of the first, or probably the second version, second level of patient cottages. It's a one-story, they're all one-story cottages, these 4 patient cottages, and with porches all around for patients to sit out on. But at this time, they weren't sleeping out yet. The treatment in general consisted in keeping the patient outdoors as much as possible in all kinds of weather. The patients took the cure by sitting in a porch-type rocker or chair, wrapped in a blanket with feet in a soapbox with a heated soapstone at the bottom. This, of course, in the coldest weather. Sitting out during all the daylight hours was rather rugged during extreme winter temperatures, as there were no windscreens or shelters then. Ladd Cottage, one of the biggest of the 4 patient cottages, the fanciest really, was built about 1900. In the years prior to 1900, it was realized that curing on the porches entailed considerable discomfort, but little was done toward improvement other than to make the porches more spacious. When Dr. Lawson Brown arrived as resident physician at Trudeau in 1900, he wanted to provide more comfort for the patient out of doors, so that the patient would enjoy living on his porch in all kinds of weather. The porches of the early cottages were small and had no protection from the wind other than the protection provided by the cottage walls. Built-in window sashes as windbreaks were found desirable, and these were installed on some of the porches at Trudeau. The depth of the porch was increased as additional cottages were built. By 1901, the sanatorium was buying Adirondack recliners, which we all know about, which Dr. Brown designed. Downtown, sitting out porches began to be added to business buildings. Here they are. Here are patients in what we now know as care chairs, and which replaced the previous versions. Okay, Hogan Block downtown, where the Artist Guild is now. You see? Okay. This building used to have another layer of porches, like this one. And this one is the Blue Duquette building downtown with its full panoply of porches. And then, so in these particular business buildings, just makes a pretty unique situation, have downtown curing as well as in cottages and at the sanatorium. And here they are with rental rooms for patients upstairs above their businesses. And then the patients would be ambulatory and would walk out to those. You sort of were curing on your own in these. Gradually, these open porches were adapted to make the experience more comfortable for patients by protecting the porch with low walls and windward sides with glass panes. These began to be designed to match the distinctive windows in the rest of the house in some of the fancier cure cottages in the private homes. So the windows were built right in and designed to match, rather than, as Phil figured out, added porches. He classified them in his cure cottage book in 3 different ways, which I will let you tell people later. One principal development in the technology of the cure, which occurred at the sanitarium, was its advocacy of the medical idea of sleeping out. Now, this was a whole new breakthrough. Dr. Trudeau wrote, as early as 1849, when consumptives made their overland journey to California in prairie schooners, more or less thorough sleeping out was an inevitable part of their treatment. An old buffalo hunter said that if they lived 2 months on the trail, they either died or got quite well. Which was no doubt a very correct observation of the results of this particular method of sleeping out. Since then, sleeping out has been more or less advocated by the Western physicians, since that 1849 or thereabouts. But the Eastern physicians were first brought into this by Dr. C.S. Millett of Brockton, Massachusetts. He was the first in the Eastern climate to practice this method. He advised mill workers when confined indoors most of the day to build sleeping out porches on their homes. Since then, wrote Dr. Trudeau, outdoors sleeping out has steadily come more and more into general use in the open-air treatment of tuberculosis. In Saranac Lake, the architectural adaptations for sleeping out were developed by resident patient architects working closely with doctor scientists. The first of these architects was William Coulter, a patient himself, who came here in 1896. He built this house for himself. You can't see the whole thing, but you're getting a glimpse of it there. And behind his head is a place where he would shortly add his own cure porch. Okay, and you can see that his porch is up here. I met his youngest, I was lucky to meet his youngest daughter many years ago now, before she died, and she told me about that. She remembered her father, and she said she thought her brothers used to tease her that she was born on that porch.
Where was that, Mary?
No, that house is still there. That's on, is it Shepherd Avenue? It's Dr. Neil Miller's house. So there are a number of houses. I think they're mostly all extant, the ones I have pictures of. In Saranac Lake, the architectural adaptations for sleeping out were developed. Oh, I told you that, sorry. After sleeping porches came into vogue, he added this one. And he built a number of others on Upper Park Avenue here for some of his other clients. Okay, this one, perhaps you know, Park Avenue. This is, well, was built for a man named Creasy, who was a partner of Coulter's in some business dealings. He was a patient, and he died rather shortly, but you probably know it maybe as Lorison Brown's house or Edward Packard's cottage. Built about 1900. This seems to be the first originally built sleeping porch on a private home. In this case, one Coulter designed for, in 1900. Houses on Upper Park Avenue, called Highland Park, were for the very wealthy who wanted the latest style. And in Saranac Lake, the latest style was sleeping out. Coulter was experimenting here. Creasy's sleeping porch was built into a corner with two open sides here, as well as the sitting out porch down below. There are several here that are on Park Avenue. Okay, this is the back of the big house on Park Avenue. You will recognize it better from the front, but here's the open porch in a very early photo, of open sleeping porch, but look what's going to happen when it rains. Not a good idea. This was called an outdoor, in the plans it was called an outdoor bedroom. It was built for a woman named Agnes McIntosh, and it was later modified for more protection from the weather. But there's also an excellent sitting out porch down there. And there's another little sleeping porch, or sitting porch on the front, above the front door. Here the next one. Okay, and also in the same neighborhood, the Duryea Cottage, another partner of Coulter's. Here the architect departed from the gambrel roof form he had used on the rest of the house. You can see it right here, that shape. In favor of a simple gable with ventilation on three sides, and I believe this is because the health requirements of cross ventilation were more important than consistency of design. Up at the sanatorium, the patient cottages at Trudeau expressed both functionally and stylishly the evolving medical development of outdoor sleeping, and they influenced residential design across the United States throughout the first half of the 20th century. In 1901, Coulter designed Child's Infirmary at the sanatorium, the first building erected in any sanatorium with rooms and porches arranged for outdoor sleeping. William Stokes and Maurice Fusman wrote that, and they'd come along a bit later. They're also architects. They were critical of Coulter's blanketing of rooms by porches, which made the rooms extremely dark, uncomfortable, and poorly ventilated. Incidentally, Child's Infirmary was not for children. That was the name of the donor. And here's what it looked like on one of the porches inside, and you can see Dr. Lorison Brown was experimenting with ideas, and he suggested skylights along here. You can see them just probably covered with snow. He suggested putting skylights over the beds on the porches. These skylights were not a success. They were torn out and replaced by the usual ceiling within a few months. One example of the evolution of the cure porch. Next was Richardson Cottage was being built at the time when idea was being developed, and he described how, Scopes and Fusman described how the development of outdoor sleeping affected buildings. Such good results appeared to be obtained, and the outdoor sleeping seemed to be enjoyed so much that immediately steps were taken to make it possible to wheel beds direct from rooms to porches. Richardson Cottage was being built at Trudeau in 1902. Work had gone too far to make the needed changes so that each patient could be wheeled directly from a room to the porch. The difficulty was overcome by making the bedroom and main entrance doors wide enough to wheel a bed through. After this, no cottage was built at Trudeau or any patient housing provided without arrangements for direct access to a porch from the patient rooms. A couple of examples of these later cottages are Phoenix, and there were two almost identical, Phoenix and Robbins. All of these that I'm showing you that were at the sanatorium are either changed greatly or torn down. So these are, Phoenix is still there, Robbins is still there, which is its double, but their porches are all enclosed. When outdoor sleeping began to be prescribed around 1901, a porch directly connected to each bedroom became standard, and sleeping porches were added to all the cottages as money was available. The almost identical Phoenix and Robbins cottages were planned so that the beds may at will be pushed directly out on an open veranda, thus enabling the patients to continue the open-air treatment, even when confined to bed, and to sleep out at night on the sheltered veranda during the milder seasons, or when thought advisable. And here's what the plan looked like. So you're looking, here's the front door, big veranda here, but doors from each of these bedrooms so that you can sleep out here. Sitting room, fireplace, bathroom, closets, two more bedrooms, and they have their own little veranda in the back. This, either Phoenix or Robbins, I'm not sure which one this is. They're identical. From 1894 to 1904, the patient cottages changed, Dr. Trudeau wrote, from small, cheap, temporary structures to larger, permanently built little homes, equipped with electricity, open fireplaces, bathrooms, and sleeping out porches for every patient. The adaptations at the sanatorium quickly influenced residential construction. Many cottages had been rented by patients in Saranac Lake Village, hardly any of which were provided with sleeping porches prior to 1900. After 1900, it was almost impossible for a house owner to rent his cottage unless it had one or more sleeping porches. Some of the physical features of sleeping porches are sliding or rolling window sashes. This is not such a good picture of the windows of the sashes, but I thought you would enjoy seeing Marshall McClintock, who was a writer. Here he is typing in bed, and what's that in his mouth? Cigarettes. But he also has, there's these big sliding windows there. The other features, besides sliding windows, which many of our houses have, are sashes that go up into the wall. I know of one house that does it. Both sashes go all the way up into the wall. There are call bells or little square holes in the wall where the call bells used to be on porches so that you could call for help. Awnings, wide stair landings with room to carry stretchers up and down. Until Mary Prescott opened her reception cottage in April of 1901, there were no special facilities for patients who were confined to bed. It was only afterward that some private cottages in the village became nursing cottages. After that, there were two types, ambulatory or up cottages and nursing cottages for the bedridden. So there were two types of sleeping porches, those for ambulatory patients who could walk out to their porches and who may even have been working during the day and curing at night, and those for bedridden patients whose beds were pushed out onto their porches day and night. You can tell the difference if you live in one of these houses by examining the doorway and the floor, looking for evidence and adaptations that would make it possible to push a bed through. Wide doors or double doors, doorways without thresholds or steps, scratches on door frames from beds being wheeled in and out. Most patients at the sanatorium up to this time were ambulatory. Most cottages there were one-story buildings, so the porches there were all-in-one veranda sleeping porches. Here cottages in town were self-contained houses, so there might be both sitting out veranda downstairs and a sleeping porch or porches upstairs. This was all covered in the national press in various ways. There we go. I don't know if you can read that from where you are, but this is an article in a magazine called Country Life in America, and it's It's called Sleeping Outdoors for Health, a phase of modern living that science demands and that is bound to become universal. It showed literally dozens of ways that an open-air sleeping facility could be added or adapted to ordinary houses. Similar articles appeared in other magazines such as House Beautiful in 1905, Good Housekeeping 1907, Craftsman Homes 1909, Bungalows, Camps and Mountain Homes 1915, Boys Life and Scientific Monthly 1917, Popular Science 1920. Sleeping porches worked their way into literature too. Even Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt slept out. The architecture of Reception Hospital, now known as Prescott House, for 20 patients was influenced by planning and design of the sanatorium. The architects learned that for all practical purposes, as much segregation of patients could be obtained in a large building as in the small 4-patient units at Trudeau. The plan of many institutions throughout the U.S. and Canada was influenced by the success of the Reception Hospital idea. In Saranac Lake, porches continued to be added to cottages as the money was available. Now this is Schiff Cottage at Sand, which is no longer there. But this was built in 1893, and this is before. You see porch down below, windows up above, and afterward, well, let me say, around in 1911, patients who occupied the second floor of Schiff Cottage protested their need of sleeping porches by taking their cure upon the lawn, much to Trudeau's amusement, sort of a sit-in. Trudeau wrote Jacob Schiff, who sent a check to keep cottage up to date. The upper story was rebuilt to keep up with the sleeping out ideas, and so now those 3 windows there's some kind of more open porch here, and they've added something here between these 2 dormers. And that's happened, that adaptation happens other places in town, and keep your eyes open for it. Around 1902 or 03, there was great demand for space for TB patients, particularly the poor, far in excess of capacity. Tents were used, and a few of what were called shacks were built, at least one at the sanatorium and a few in the village. These were essentially freestanding cure porches. And here's one of those. This is a Pomeroy Cottage on Baker Street. And I think that one may still be there. There used to also be one up at the sanatorium. Oops. That's that one off. There used to be one at the sanatorium, which I think has since been torn down. But